The vault had 5 minutes left before everything inside would dissolve into acid. 25 experts stood helpless. Guns were ready. Lives were expendable. And then, in the corner of the room, a woman no one noticed, just a quiet waitress with tired eyes and a scar on her arm, saw a pattern no one else could see. She spoke 5 words, and the fate of an empire changed forever. But this story isn't just about power or danger. It's about a wounded police dog who refused to quit, a broken officer who lost everything, and a woman the world overlooked, until she became impossible to ignore. What happens next will make you believe in quiet miracles and second chances for the forgotten. Before we begin, tell me where you are watching from. Drop your country in the comments below. And if you believe no child or animal should ever face fear alone, hit subscribe now and share this story with someone who needs hope. The room was silent, but it was not empty of sound. The faint hum of ventilation drifted along the concrete ceiling. Leather shoes shifted once, then stilled. Cigarette smoke hung heavy in the air, mixing with the metallic scent of fear and cold sweat. The kind of silence that pressed against the ears, demanding attention. At the center of the room stood the vault. It was a massive steel cylinder, nearly 8 feet tall, bolted directly into the reinforced floor. Its surface was scarred by failed attempts, microscopic drill marks, faint heat discolorations, hairline scratches where tools had met resistance and lost. 6 analog dials sat above a digital panel that flashed shifting sequences of numbers. Behind a thick glass plate, mechanical gears turned slowly, deliberately, as if the vault were alive and aware of the men surrounding it. The vault had been sealed for 48 hours. Around it stood 25 men, none of them ordinary. They were killers, financiers, tacticians, men whose decisions ruined lives without them ever needing to raise their voices. Some wore tailored suits worth more than most people earned in a year. Others dressed simply, favoring function over appearance. All of them shared the same expression now: tight jaws, restless eyes, the barely contained panic of men unaccustomed to failure. They had brought in everyone. Cryptographers flown from London, men who had broken military-grade encryption for governments that did not officially acknowledge their existence. Safe crackers from Chicago who had once emptied bank vaults in under 10 minutes. A disgraced mathematical prodigy from MIT, brilliant and unstable, who muttered equations under his breath as if praying. Even a former CIA codebreaker who had once worked on nuclear launch security. Every method had been tried. Every system had been challenged. All of them had failed. A digital clock mounted high on the wall glowed red. 00:05:59. 5 minutes remained. If the vault did not open before the timer reached 0, the internal acid release would activate. The ledger inside, handwritten, irreplaceable, detailing every transaction, bribe, and murder tied to the Castellano Empire, would be reduced to chemical residue. Without that ledger, the empire would collapse. In the far corner of the room, seated alone in a leather armchair, was Alexander Castellano. He was 36 years old, tall and lean, with a frame that suggested restraint rather than excess. His black hair was neatly combed back, untouched by gray, his face clean-shaven, his jawline sharp enough to look sculpted rather than born. His eyes were dark brown, nearly black, and utterly still. The kind of eyes that observed without revealing anything in return. No one looked at him directly. Alexander did not pace. He did not speak. He did not check the clock. In his right hand, he rolled a gold lighter between his fingers, opening and closing it with a soft, deliberate click. Click. The sound echoed far louder than it should have. Click. Each repetition landed like a measured threat, a reminder that time was moving, whether anyone was ready or not. Then the silence broke. A sharp crash rang out near the entrance as a glass tray shattered against the marble floor. Crystal skidded outward, spinning to a stop. The sound snapped every head toward the door. A waitress stood frozen, eyes wide, hands empty. She was young, late 20s at most, slim and slightly hunched, as if accustomed to making herself smaller. Her black uniform was plain, functional, the kind worn by people meant to blend into the background. Dark hair fell loose from a careless tie at the nape of her neck, framing a face pale with fear. Her name was Cassandra Hartwell. She dropped to her knees immediately, apology spilling from her lips as she began gathering the broken glass with trembling hands. She scrubbed at the spilled liquor with a rag, her movements quick and desperate not to be noticed. desperate not to draw attention in a room where attention could be fatal. No one spoke. Alexander's lighter clicked again. Click. Cassie kept her head down, but as she wiped the floor, her eyes lifted without conscious permission. Not toward the men, not toward the guns, toward the vault. She stared at the dials, the way the hands moved, not together, not evenly. One advanced, another paused. A third ticked backward before correcting itself. The digital panel flashed relentlessly, but her attention stayed on the mechanics above it. She frowned. The experts were focused on the numbers, typing furiously, arguing over algorithms. But the dials followed a rhythm, not random, deliberate. Her breathing slowed. Cassie had not studied mathematics in years, not since she'd been forced to leave MIT to take care of her family, but patterns never left her. They lived in her bones. In the memory of her father's workshop, in the sound of ticking clocks, in the lessons learned long before she knew how valuable they would become. She swallowed, the rag stilled in her hands. 5 words formed in her mind before she realized she was speaking them. The clocks are the key. The room froze. Keyboards stopped clicking. Arguments cut off mid-sentence. 25 men turned toward the voice that should not have existed. Cassie realized what she had done a second too late. Alexander Castellano stood. The scrape of his chair against the floor sounded impossibly loud. The gold lighter disappeared into his pocket as he reached beneath his jacket and drew a handgun with smooth, practiced ease. Cassie's heart slammed against her ribs. She waited for the barrel to turn toward her. It didn't. Alexander raised the gun and aimed it at the experts surrounding the vault. His voice, when he spoke, was calm, almost bored. 48 hours, he said. Millions of dollars, and none of you thought to listen to the machine. The men paled. Alexander's eyes shifted at last, settling on Cassie, not with anger, not with contempt, with interest. Stand up, he said. Cassie obeyed, legs shaking, hands clenched at her sides. For the first time since entering the room, Alexander Castellano truly saw her. And for the first time, the countdown no longer belonged to the vault. The vault did not open immediately. For a brief, dangerous moment after Cassandra Hartwell stood up, nothing changed except the air in the room. It grew heavier, denser, as if the walls themselves were listening. The red countdown clock continued its merciless rhythm, numbers bleeding downward 1 second at a time, reminding everyone that whatever had just happened could still end in disaster. Alexander Castellano did not lower his gun. He remained standing, tall and perfectly balanced, the weapon held loosely in his right hand, not aimed with urgency but with certainty. He was the kind of man who never rushed because the world had learned to wait for him. Up close, Cassie could see details she had not dared notice before. The faint crease between his brows that suggested long habits of concentration, the absence of unnecessary motion, the stillness of someone who had learned early that control was the only real power. Explain, Alexander said. It was not a request. It was not loud. It carried no threat in its tone. That was what made it terrifying. Cassie's mouth went dry. She felt every eye in the room on her now. 25 men who had spent their lives being feared, suddenly confronted by a waitress who had dared interrupt them. Her instincts screamed at her to apologize, to retreat, to say she was mistaken, but she didn't. Once the pattern had revealed itself, she could not unsee it. They're not synchronized, she said, forcing her voice to steady. The analog dials. Everyone's been staring at the digital panel, but the real system is mechanical. The electronics are just there to overwhelm you. A man near the vault snorted. He was broad-shouldered, with a shaved head and a jaw clenched so tight it seemed carved from stone. One of the Chicago safecrackers. That's ridiculous. We've mapped every component. No, you've measured them, Cassie replied. You didn't listen to them. Alexander's eyes flicked to the man who had spoken, silencing him without a word. Then he looked back at Cassie. Go on. Cassie stepped closer to the vault, close enough now to feel the faint vibration through the soles of her shoes. She raised her hand, stopping just short of touching the steel. Each dial moves on a different interval, she said. Forward, backward, pause. It's not random, it's a rhythm. The designer expected people to attack it with force and computation. He didn't expect patience. A bead of sweat slid down her spine. Behind her, a new sound entered the room. The soft, measured click of claws against marble. The German shepherd had stood up. Cassie hadn't noticed the dog before, not consciously. Now she saw him clearly. He was large, even for his breed, though age had thinned him slightly. His coat was a mix of tan and black, dulled by time, his muzzle gray. One ear stood straight, while the other bent at the tip, giving him a perpetually alert, questioning look. His left, front leg ended in a prosthetic that bore the marks of long use. He moved with calm purpose and stopped beside her, sitting down as if he belonged there. A murmur rippled through the room. Alexander glanced at the dog, then at the man standing near the far wall. "Mercer," he said. "Your dog?" Officer Daniel Mercer stepped forward. He had been silent until now, watching everything with a cop's trained detachment. He was in his early 40s, tall and solid, his frame built from years of work rather than exercise. His dark hair was cropped short, threaded with gray, and his beard was neatly trimmed but not styled. There was a faint scar along his right cheekbone, pale against weathered skin. "Yes," Daniel said. "His name's Rex." Alexander studied the dog for a moment. "He seems interested." Daniel's jaw tightened. "He doesn't move unless something's wrong." That earned Rex a brief, thoughtful look from Alexander. Cassie swallowed again. "The dials correspond to prime intervals," she said, "but not the numbers themselves, the gaps between them. It's an old method. My father used to—" She stopped herself. This wasn't the time for memories. "The sequence resets every 60 seconds, she continued. "You can't brute force it. You have to wait for the alignment." "How long?" Alexander asked. Cassie glanced at the clock. 90 seconds. "If I'm right," she said carefully. "One cycle." Silence fell. Alexander turned his head slightly, addressing the room without looking away from Cassie. "No one touches the vault," he said. "No one speaks unless I ask." Then he nodded at Cassie. "Do it." Cassie placed her palm against the steel. The vault was cold, but not dead. She felt it immediately, the faint hum beneath the surface, the subtle resistance that reminded her of standing beside an old industrial press or a grandfather clock. She closed her eyes. The room disappeared. She was 8 years old again, standing on a wooden stool in her father's workshop, surrounded by the smell of oil and dust. He had been a tall man with gentle hands, always smiling when he worked. He used to tell her that machines told stories if you listened long enough. "Don't rush," he would say. "They hate that." Cassie breathed in slowly, counting the ticks she felt through the metal. Rex leaned closer, his head tilted, ears pricked. The first dial paused. The second reversed. The third advanced. "There," Cassie whispered. She adjusted the first dial by a fraction, barely perceptible. The second followed. The third resisted, then clicked softly into place. The sound was small, but in the silent room it rang like a bell. The countdown clock froze at 0:17. A low mechanical hum rolled through the vault as the gears behind the glass accelerated, aligning with smooth, deliberate precision. Locks disengaged in sequence, one after another, until the final mechanism released with a deep, resonant clunk. The vault door slid open. No explosion, no acid. Inside, neatly arranged on steel shelves, lay ledgers bound in black leather, their pages yellowed with age, names, dates, transactions. An empire laid bare. No one spoke. Alexander Castellano stepped forward and looked inside. He did not touch anything at first. He simply stood there, absorbing the sight. Then he exhaled slowly. Behind Cassie, one of the experts laughed, weakly, relief breaking through disbelief. Alexander turned. The gunshot cracked through the room. The laughter stopped. The man collapsed, clutching his leg, screaming as blood spread across the marble floor. Alexander lowered the gun. "I don't tolerate incompetence, he said calmly, "especially when it wastes my time." The experts dropped to their knees. Cassie stood frozen, the echo of the gunshot ringing in her ears. Rex growled low in his throat, placing himself slightly in front of her. Alexander looked at her again. "You," he said. "What's your name?" "Cassandra Hartwell," she replied. Her voice shook, but she didn't look away. Alexander studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded once. "Take her somewhere safe," he said to Mercer. "We'll talk later." Daniel hesitated. "Safe how?" Alexander's eyes flicked to him. "Alive." That was all. As Daniel guided Cassie out of the room, Rex limping faithfully at her side, Cassie realized something terrifying. She had not saved herself. She had only been noticed. Cassandra Hartwell did not sleep that night. The room they brought her to was not a cell, but it felt like one. It sat deep within the Castellano compound, far below street level, insulated from sound and time. The walls were poured concrete, smooth and cold to the touch, lit by a single recessed strip of white light that never dimmed. There were no windows, no clocks, just a narrow bed with crisp sheets, a metal chair, and a small table bolted to the floor. Safe, Alexander had said. Alive. Cassie sat on the edge of the bed, hands clasped tightly in her lap, staring at nothing. Her body had not yet caught up with what had happened. Her ears still rang with the echo of the gunshot. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the man collapsing, blood blooming across the marble floor. She had grown up poor, surrounded by struggle and quiet desperation, but she had never been this close to violence delivered without hesitation. Rex lay on the floor beside her, his large body stretched out, protectively, head resting on his paws. In the harsh light, his age showed more clearly. The fur along his spine had thinned, and the scars along his flank were visible where hair no longer grew evenly. His prosthetic leg rested awkwardly, a reminder of a life that had demanded sacrifice without apology. He was breathing slowly now, the steady rhythm of a creature who had learned how to stay calm in dangerous places. Officer Daniel Mercer stood near the door, arms crossed, his weight shifted slightly to favor his left leg, a habit born from an old knee injury he never talked about. Up close, Cassie could see the toll the job had taken on him. The faint lines around his eyes were not from age alone, but from years of watching things he could not fix. His beard, though neatly kept, carried flecks of gray that suggested he had stopped caring whether anyone noticed. "You did good," Daniel said quietly. Cassie flinched at the sound of his voice, then looked up. "I don't feel like I did." Daniel nodded once. "That means you are still human." She let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Is that man alive?" Daniel said. "For now. Alexander doesn't usually kill in front of witnesses unless he means it. That shot was a message." "To me?" Cassie asked. "To everyone," Daniel replied, "but especially to you." That settled like a stone in her chest. Daniel glanced down at Rex. "You okay, old man?" Rex lifted his head slightly and thumped his tail once against the floor. Daniel's expression softened, for just a moment. It was subtle, but Cassie noticed. There was history there, loyalty built through blood and loss. "You don't have to stay," Cassie said suddenly. "I mean, I'm not your responsibility." Daniel met her gaze. "You stepped into something big tonight, bigger than you should have had to. I'm not walking away from that." Before Cassie could respond, the door opened. Two men entered, moving with the quiet confidence of people accustomed to controlling rooms. They were both tall, dressed in dark suits that fit too well to be coincidental. One was older, perhaps in his late 50s, with silver hair combed back and a face marked by deep lines around his mouth and eyes. His posture was rigid, military in its discipline. The other was younger, broad-shouldered, with a shaved head and a thick neck, his expression flat and unreadable. The older man spoke first. "Mr. Castellano will see her now." Daniel didn't move. "She's exhausted." The older man's lips tightened slightly. "Mr. Castellano is aware." Rex rose slowly to his feet, positioning himself closer to Cassie. Cassie stood. Her legs felt unsteady, but she forced herself upright. "It's fine," she said to Daniel. "I'll go." Daniel studied her for a long second, then nodded. "I'll be right outside." They led her through a series of corridors that all looked the same, clean, silent, deliberately disorienting. Cassie focused on counting her steps, grounding herself in something measurable. Finally, they stopped before a heavy steel door and opened it without knocking. Alexander Castellano stood near a long table, his jacket removed, sleeves rolled neatly to his forearms. The room was larger than the one below, furnished with restrained elegance rather than excess, dark wood, leather, steel, everything chosen for function as much as impression. Up close, Cassie noticed details she had missed before. A thin scar ran along Alexander's left forearm, pale against his skin. His movements were economical, each gesture precise, as if wasted energy offended him. When he looked at her, it was not with threat, but with assessment. "Sit," he said. Cassie sat. Alexander poured himself a glass of water, not alcohol, and drank slowly before speaking. "You embarrassed a lot of people tonight." "I didn't mean to," Cassie said. "I know," he replied. "That's why you're still breathing." He leaned against the table, arms crossed. "You studied mathematics." "Yes." "You quit." "Yes." Why? Cassie hesitated. Then, because lying felt pointless here, she answered. My father died. I had to take care of my family. Alexander nodded once, as if confirming something he already knew. You understand systems, he said. Mechanical, numerical. You see what others overlook. She said nothing. There are people in my organization who will want you gone, Alexander continued. Not because you're a threat now, but because you will be. Cassie's throat tightened. Then why keep me? Alexander's gaze sharpened. Because I don't waste assets. The word landed heavily. You will stay here, he said. You will be protected. In return, you will help me understand what's hidden in those ledgers. Patterns. Weaknesses. Who lies? Who steals? Cassie felt the walls closing. I'm not part of your world. Alexander stepped closer. You are now. Silence stretched between them. Finally, Cassie spoke. What happens if I say no? Alexander studied her for a long moment. Then he said, calmly, I don't recommend finding out. When Cassie was escorted back to her room, the adrenaline finally drained from her body, leaving behind bone-deep exhaustion. She sat back down on the bed, her hands shaking now that she no longer needed them to be steady. Rex padded over and pressed his head against her knee. She rested her hand on his fur. We're in trouble, she whispered. Rex huffed softly, unconcerned. Daniel appeared in the doorway minutes later. You okay? I don't know, Cassie replied honestly. He nodded. That's about right. As he turned to leave, Cassie called after him. Why did you stay? Daniel paused. His shoulders tensed briefly before he answered. Because I've seen what happens when good people get swallowed by bad systems. He glanced back at her, eyes hard but sincere. And because Rex likes you, he's usually right. The door closed softly behind him. Cassie lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling. She understood now that opening the vault had not been an ending. It had been an introduction, and being seen was heavier than being invisible had ever been. Morning arrived underground without light. Cassandra Hartwell woke not because her body was rested, but because her mind refused to stay still. The ceiling above her was the same smooth concrete, unchanged, indifferent to the passage of hours. Somewhere beyond the walls, systems hummed softly, a constant reminder that nothing here was natural or accidental. She lay still for several seconds, listening, measuring her breathing, grounding herself the way she had learned to do during panic attacks she never told anyone about. Rex was already awake. The German shepherd sat near the door, alert but calm, his posture disciplined in the way of working dogs who never fully retire. In the clearer light of morning, Cassandra noticed the age in him more sharply. The fur along his back had thinned, and his eyes, though still intelligent, carried a faint cloudiness that spoke of long years and too many nights like this one. He was 12, maybe 13, well past the age most K9 units allowed. Dogs to serve, but there was nothing fragile about him. He had learned how to conserve strength. You didn't sleep either, did you? Cassandra murmured. Rex flicked one ear and looked at her, then away, as if the answer were obvious. The door opened without warning. Daniel Mercer stepped inside, holding 2 paper cups of coffee. He wore the same clothes as the night before, his coat now unbuttoned, his tie gone. In daylight, artificial though it was, he looked more worn. The lines around his eyes were deeper, his shoulders slightly slumped, the posture of a man who had slept in his chair more nights than he cared to remember. Thought you might need this, he said, offering her a cup. She accepted it with both hands. Thank you. Daniel glanced at Rex. They're letting him stay. That's not nothing. Cassandra looked up. Letting? Daniel didn't smile. Alexander Castellano doesn't allow variables he can't control. You and the dog are exceptions. That settled uneasily in her stomach. Before she could ask more, footsteps approached. 2 men entered, neither from the night before. The first was tall and slender, mid-40s, with ash blonde hair cut neatly short and wire-rimmed glasses perched low on his nose. His face was sharp, almost academic, with thin lips and eyes that moved constantly, cataloging details. He wore a charcoal suit that fit perfectly but carried no warmth. The second was broader, heavier, his build thick through the chest and arms, with a close-cropped beard and dark hair flecked with gray. A deep crease cut between his brows, giving him a perpetually displeased expression. He moved like a man who had once relied on physical force and learned too late that it came at a cost. The blond man spoke first. Ms. Hartwell, I'm Adrian Vale, Financial oversight. His voice was smooth, precise, and completely devoid of warmth. The larger man nodded once. Thomas Klein, internal security. Klein's gaze lingered on Rex for a fraction longer than necessary. Rex met it calmly, unblinking. Mr. Castellano is ready, Vale said. They escorted Cassandra through a different set of corridors this time. Longer, brighter, more deliberately arranged. This part of the compound felt less like a bunker and more like a corporate headquarters hidden beneath the city. Glass walls revealed offices where men and women worked quietly, efficiently, their movements practiced. Screens displayed charts, shipping routes, financial models. It was unsettling how familiar it all looked. Alexander waited in a conference room at the end of the hall. He stood by the windowless wall, reviewing documents on a tablet. In daylight, Cassandra saw more clearly how controlled his presence was. He did not fidget. He did not waste motion. His beard was faint, almost imperceptible, a shadow along his jaw that suggested he shaved more out of habit than necessity. He looked like a man who treated his body as a tool. "Sit," he said without looking up. Cassandra sat. Adrian Vale took the seat across from her, folding his hands neatly on the table. Klein remained standing near the door, arms crossed, an unspoken warning. Alexander finally looked at her. "You understand numbers," he said, "but numbers don't exist alone. They exist in systems." "Yes," Cassandra replied. "You saw a pattern others missed," he continued. "That tells me you don't just calculate, you interpret." She didn't argue. Alexander slid a folder across the table. Inside were the photocopies of ledger pages, names she did not recognize, columns of figures written in different inks, different hands. "These records go back 20 years, Alexander said. "Some are accurate, some are lies. I need to know which is which." Adrian Vale leaned forward slightly. "Your role would be analysis only. No decisions, no enforcement." Cassandra looked at him. "That's not true." Vale's lips tightened. Alexander allowed himself a faint smile. "Good, you're paying attention." Klein spoke for the first time. His voice was low, roughened by age and old injuries. "If she stays, she becomes a liability. People will test her." "And?" Alexander asked. "And liabilities break." Cassandra met Klein's gaze. She saw something there, not cruelty, but experience. A man who had once believed strength was enough and learned otherwise. Alexander turned back to Cassandra. "This is the arrangement. You stay here. You work with Vale's team. In return, you are protected." "And my family?" Cassandra asked quietly. Alexander studied her. "You have family?" She hesitated, then nodded. "My mother, my younger brother." "How old?" 12. Alexander nodded once. "They will be safe," Vale interjected. "Within reason." Alexander's gaze hardened. Vale fell silent. "What happens if I make a mistake?" Cassandra asked. Alexander didn't answer. Immediately. When he did, his voice was even. "You won't." The meeting ended without ceremony. As they escorted her back, Cassandra felt the weight of it settle fully into her bones. She had not agreed. She had not refused. The choice had never truly existed. Daniel was waiting near her room. "Well?" he asked. She shrugged weakly. "I'm employed." Daniel exhaled through his nose. "That bad, huh?" She looked at him. "You knew this would happen." "I hoped it wouldn't," he said. "That's different." They walked together for a few steps. Rex followed, limping but steady. "You don't belong here," Daniel said quietly, "and that's exactly why they'll use you." "Why do you stay?" she asked again. Daniel stopped. For a long moment, he didn't answer. Then he said, "Because I've spent most of my career watching systems protect the wrong people." He looked at Rex. "And because walking away once cost me someone I couldn't replace." That was all he said. Later that day, Cassandra was brought into a glass-walled office and introduced to her workspace. A desk, a terminal, a stack of documents taller than her forearm. Adrian Vale stood beside her, explaining protocols with clinical detachment. As Cassandra sat down, fingers hovering over the keyboard, she felt Rex settle at her feet. She realized something then. The vault had been simple. This was not. Cassandra Hartwell learned quickly that time behaved differently underground. There were no windows to mark the passage of day or night, only scheduled meals and the gradual fatigue that crept into her bones. By the third day, she had stopped trying to guess the hour. Her world had narrowed to glass walls, white light, and numbers that refused to behave the way numbers were supposed to. Her office sat at the far end of the financial wing, enclosed on 3 sides by reinforced glass. From the outside, anyone could see her working. From the inside, she felt exposed, as if she were being studied even when no one stood nearby. The desk was immaculate, the terminal high-end and secure, the chair firm enough to discourage comfort. Everything about the space suggested productivity without rest. Adrian Vale stood behind her for most of that first morning. He rarely blinked when he read. His pale blue eyes skimmed data with mechanical efficiency, moving faster than Cassandra would have thought, possible if she hadn't already learned not to underestimate people in this place. Up close, his ash-blonde hair revealed careful maintenance, the kind of man who controlled small details because larger ones often slipped beyond reach. His hands were long-fingered and clean, a theorist's hands rather than a laborer's. "You're behind schedule," he said calmly. Cassandra did not turn around. "I started less than 4 hours ago." "Yes," Vale replied. "And in that time, you should have identified at least 3 inconsistencies." She finally faced him. "I have." That earned his attention. She turned the monitor slightly and highlighted a series of transactions tied to a shipping subsidiary operating out of Milwaukee. On the surface, the numbers were reasonable, balanced, too balanced. "These transfers are structured," she said. "Not illegally, at least not obviously. But the distributions don't follow natural variance." Vale frowned. "You're saying they're fabricated." "I'm saying they're curated," Cassandra corrected. "Someone is smoothing the data, making it look clean. Real money doesn't move this politely." Vale leaned closer, studying the screen. For a moment, the controlled neutrality in his expression cracked, replaced by something closer to unease. "That subsidiary reports directly to Thomas Klein," he said slowly. Cassandra felt a tightening in her chest. "Then someone is lying to him. Or," Vale said, straightening, "he's lying to us." That afternoon, Cassandra met the rest of Vale's team. They were analysts, accountants, logistics planners, people who would have fit easily into any legitimate corporation. One was a woman in her early 30s named Marisol Vega, short and sharp-eyed, with dark curls pulled into a severe bun and a habit of chewing pens when she thought no one was looking. Another was Paul Henning, a soft-spoken man with slumped shoulders and round glasses who apologized every time he interrupted, even when his information proved critical. They were not criminals in the way Cassandra had expected. They were workers. Rex lay beneath her desk throughout the day, rising only when someone unfamiliar approached. His presence grounded her. The quiet weight of his body, the faint sound of his breathing, reminded her that not everything in this place was designed to consume her. Late that evening, Cassandra noticed something else. It wasn't in the ledgers themselves, but in the timing. Reports were being finalized just minutes before audits. Corrections were being entered at odd hours, always by the same terminal ID. She cross-referenced access logs and frowned. The ID belonged to a man named Victor Hale. She hadn't met him yet. She asked Marisol quietly, "Who's Hale?" Marisol hesitated, then lowered her voice. "Internal logistics, senior level, keeps to himself." That wasn't an answer. When Cassandra finally saw Victor Hale, she understood why. He was in his late 50s, tall but stooped slightly, with a frame that looked like it had once been powerful and slowly worn down. His hair was dark but thinning, combed straight back in a style that hadn't changed in decades. A trimmed mustache sat above a mouth that rarely smiled. His eyes were sharp, calculating, and perpetually tired. There was something else about him, a tension that never fully relaxed, like a man waiting for a blow he expected but did not know when it would come. Hale acknowledged Cassandra with a curt nod when Vale introduced them. His handshake was firm, his grip lingering just long enough to establish dominance. "You're the girl from the vault," he said. "Yes," Cassandra replied. "Impressive," Hale said flatly. "But finance isn't machinery. Be careful not to confuse the two." Cassandra met his gaze. "Patterns are patterns." Hale's jaw tightened. That night, Cassandra couldn't stop thinking about him. She replayed their brief interaction, the way his eyes had flicked toward Rex and then away, the way his posture shifted when Vale mentioned audits. Fear, maybe, or anger. She worked late, too late. The compound had grown quiet when she finally pushed back from the desk. Her eyes burned, her shoulders ached, and her thoughts felt thick, slow. Rex stood and stretched, his prosthetic clicking softly. "Let's go," she whispered. They had made it halfway down the corridor when Rex stopped. He stiffened, ears forward, body angled protectively in front of her. Cassandra followed his gaze and saw a figure at the far end of the hall, Victor Hale. He stood alone, hands in his pockets, posture relaxed in a way that felt practiced rather than natural. The overhead lights cast deep shadows across his face, sharpening his features. "You work late," he said. "So do you," Cassandra replied. Hale smiled faintly. It didn't reach his eyes. "That's how you survive here." He glanced down at Rex. "That thing makes people nervous." "He keeps me alive," Cassandra said. Hale's eyes flicked back to hers. "Alive is relative." The words chilled her. "I looked at the Milwaukee subsidiary," she said evenly. "Your numbers are interesting." Hale's smile vanished. For a fraction of a second, something raw surfaced. Panic, perhaps, or rage. Then it was gone. "You're new," he said quietly. "You don't understand how things work yet." "Then explain it to me," Cassandra replied. He leaned closer, his voice dropping. "Some patterns exist because powerful men need them to. If you pull too hard on a thread, you don't just unravel the fabric, you get buried in it." Rex growled, low and unmistakable. Hale straightened, hands raised slightly in mock surrender. "Just advice." He walked away without another word. Cassandra stood still long after he disappeared around the corner. When she returned to her room, Daniel Mercer was waiting, outside the door. "You're making waves," he said. "I didn't mean to," Cassandra replied. "Again." Daniel gave a tired smile. "Around here, that's the only kind that matter." She hesitated. "If I told you someone inside is stealing, not for money, but for leverage, would you believe me?" Daniel's expression hardened. "I'd ask who." "Victor Hale," she said. Daniel exhaled slowly. "That's bad." "Because he's dangerous?" "Because he's patient," Daniel said. "And men like that don't make threats unless they're already cornered." Cassandra looked down at Rex, then back at Daniel. "What happens now?" Daniel met her gaze. "Now we find out how far the rot goes." As Cassandra lay awake later, staring at the ceiling, she realized something that made her stomach twist. The vault had contained secrets, but this place was built on them, and she had just touched one that didn't want to be seen. Cassandra Hartwell realized she was being tested the moment the data disappeared. It happened quietly, without alarms or obvious signs of sabotage. One moment, the screen in front of her displayed a clean sequence of transaction logs from the Milwaukee subsidiary, and the next, it refreshed into a sterile message indicating restricted access. No error, no warning, just absence, as if the information had never existed. She did not react immediately. Years of surviving on too little sleep and too much responsibility had taught her that panic wasted time. Instead, she leaned back slightly in her chair, hands folded in her lap, and observed. The office around her remained unchanged. Adrian Vale was speaking in low tones with Marisol across the room. Paul Henning typed steadily, shoulders hunched, eyes fixed on his screen. No one looked at her. Rex lifted his head from beneath the desk, ears angling forward. "Not yet," Cassandra murmured under her breath. She logged out, then back in, following standard protocol. The restriction remained. She checked her permissions, unchanged. That told her everything she needed to know. This wasn't a system decision. It was a human one. Someone had revoked her access deliberately. She stood, smoothing the front of her sweater, and walked toward Adrian Vale's office. Rex followed at her heel, his gait uneven but purposeful. Vale looked up as she entered, irritation flickering across his face before he masked it. "There's been a permissions change on my terminal," Cassandra said evenly. Vale frowned. "That shouldn't be possible without my authorization." "And yet," she replied. Vale typed quickly, his fingers precise. After a few seconds, his expression hardened. "Victor Hale," that name again. "On whose authority?" Cassandra asked. Vale hesitated. It was brief, but she saw it. "Internal security has limited autonomy in matters of risk containment." "You mean Klein?" Cassandra said. Vale did not correct her. Before either of them could speak further, the office door opened, and Thomas Klein stepped inside. Up close, Klein's physical presence was difficult to ignore. He stood over 6 feet tall, built thick through the chest and shoulders, his posture rigid from years spent in environments where relaxation invited injury. His beard was dark and trimmed close, streaked with gray that suggested he had earned every year. A faint limp marked his walk, subtle but constant, the result of an injury that had never healed correctly. "I assume this is about the access lock," Klein said. "It is," Cassandra replied. Klein regarded her with an expression that was not unkind, but not sympathetic either. You were given limited authority. You exceeded it. I followed the patterns, she said. They led to Hale. That doesn't mean you get to act on them, Klein replied. This organization doesn't run on instincts. Cassandra held his gaze. It runs on lies. Silence stretched. Vale shifted uncomfortably. Klein exhaled through his nose. You're intelligent, he said, but intelligence doesn't make you untouchable. Someone needed to see how you'd react. Who? Cassandra asked. Klein's mouth tightened. Everyone. That night, Cassandra was summoned again. This time, the room was different. Alexander Castellano's private office sat at the highest level of the underground complex, directly beneath the city's foundations. The space was wider than the others, furnished sparsely but expensively. A single desk dominated the center, its surface clear except for a leather folder and a glass of water. Soft lighting cast deliberate shadows, emphasizing control rather than comfort. Alexander stood with his back to her when she entered. Sit, he said. She did. You lost access today, Alexander said without turning. Yes. Did you panic? No. Did you complain? No. Did you look for another way? Cassandra paused. I observed. Alexander turned then, slowly. In the subdued light, his face looked harder, carved by restraint. Good, he said. Because today wasn't about Hale. Her pulse quickened. Then what was it about? About you, Alexander replied, and whether you would try to protect yourself. She frowned. From what? From me. The words landed heavier than any threat. Alexander walked to the desk and opened the leather folder. Inside were photographs, surveillance stills, Cassandra leaving her office, Cassandra speaking with Daniel Mercer in a corridor, Cassandra kneeling to check Rex's prosthetic harness. You've made connections, Alexander said. That's dangerous. They keep me alive, Cassandra replied. Alexander's eyes flicked up sharply. That answer was a risk. Yes, she said. So was forcing me into this position. A long silence followed. Then, unexpectedly, Alexander laughed. It was quiet and brief, but genuine enough to unsettle her. You're learning faster than I anticipated. He closed the folder. Victor Hale has been stealing, yes, but not for profit, for insurance. He's been building leverage against me for years. You found the edge of it. Then why block me? Cassandra asked. To see if you'd run, Alexander said simply, or if you'd adapt. She swallowed. And? You adapted. Alexander stepped closer, which means the next test won't be theoretical. Cassandra's chest tightened. What do you want from me? I want you to audit Hale completely, Alexander said, quietly. No system access, no alerts, no trail. That's impossible, Cassandra said before she could stop herself. Alexander raised an eyebrow. You opened my vault. She exhaled slowly. I'll need help. Alexander nodded. You'll have Mercer. That surprised her. He's a liability, so are you, Alexander replied. That's what makes this interesting. When Cassandra left the office, Daniel Mercer was waiting outside, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed. His expression told her he already knew. Congratulations, he said dryly. You've been promoted. To what? She asked. Target, Daniel replied. They walked together down the corridor. Rex limped between them, alert but calm. Daniel spoke quietly. Klein didn't trust you. Hale fears you. Vale doesn't know what to make of you. That means you're in the middle. I didn't ask for this, Cassandra said. No, Daniel agreed, but you're here. She stopped walking. Why do you keep helping me? Daniel hesitated. His jaw tightened, the scar along his cheek pulling slightly. Because once, I ignored a pattern I didn't like. It got someone killed. He looked at Rex. I don't plan on doing that again. Later, alone in her room, Cassandra spread handwritten notes across the small table. Without system access, she relied on memory, logic, fragments she had already seen. She sketched timelines, drew arrows, circled names. Rex watched her silently. Somewhere above them, Chicago continued its relentless rhythm, unaware of the quiet war unfolding beneath its streets. Cassandra leaned back, exhaustion pressing in, and understood something with frightening clarity. The test had never been about loyalty. It had been about survival. And it was only beginning. Cassandra Hartwell did not begin with the numbers. Without system access, numbers were a trap, They invited certainty where none existed. Instead, she began with people, habits, timing, the small human errors that even disciplined systems could not fully erase. She spread her handwritten notes across the table in her room, arranging them not by date or account, but by proximity. Who spoke to whom, who authorized which shipment, who always appeared one step removed from responsibility. Rex lay beside the table, chin on his paws, eyes following her movements. His breathing was steady, but his ears shifted often, attuned to distant sounds. Age had dulled his speed, not his instincts. Daniel Mercer joined her an hour later, closing the door softly behind him. He carried a folder thin enough to be harmless looking, the kind that didn't raise suspicion if someone glimpsed it in passing. "You were right," he said quietly. "Hale doesn't steal to enrich himself. He collects pressure, points." Cassandra nodded. "Insurance." "Against Alexander," Daniel confirmed, "and anyone else who might outlive him." Daniel placed the folder on the table. Inside were photocopies, shipping manifests, port access logs, handwritten notes taken during interviews that never made it into official reports. Cassandra scanned them quickly, her mind aligning fragments into shape. "There's a pattern," she said. "Not in the amounts, in the delays." Daniel leaned in. "Explain." "Every shipment he touches arrives late by a predictable margin, 12 to 18 hours. Long enough to trigger penalties, short enough to be dismissed as weather or customs backlog." "And those penalties?" Daniel asked. "Paid by subsidiaries that Hale doesn't officially control," Cassandra said. "Money moves sideways, quiet." Daniel exhaled. "He's bleeding the system without leaving a wound." "And building leverage," Cassandra added. "Every delay gives him a reason. Every reason becomes a favor. Every favor becomes a debt." She circled a name on the page. "This dock supervisor, Ethan Rowe. He appears in 3 separate delay clusters." Daniel frowned. "I know him." "Tell me," Cassandra said. Rowe, Daniel explained, was in his early 40s, lean to the point of gauntness, with close-cropped hair and a perpetual squint that came from years staring into lake glare. He had once been a longshoreman, then moved into supervision after a back injury, ended his time on the docks. Reliable, quiet, divorced, no criminal record. The kind of man systems depended on because he did not attract attention. "He drinks alone," Daniel said. "Same bar, same stool, never gets drunk, just tired." Cassandra tapped the page. "He's the hinge." They waited until the next night. The bar sat near the river, narrow and dim, smelling of old wood and fried food. The kind of place that had survived because it never tried to be anything else. Ethan Rowe sat where Daniel said he would, nursing a beer he barely touched. Cassandra did not approach him. Instead, she watched. Rowe checked his phone at precise intervals, not messages, the time. He flinched when the door opened, then relaxed when he recognized the sound. He wasn't afraid of violence. He was afraid of interruption. Daniel spoke to the bartender quietly, then took a seat 2 stools away. Rex remained outside with a handler Daniel trusted, a young officer named Lena Price, early 30s, compact build, dark hair pulled tight, eyes sharp and curious. She had transferred into logistics enforcement after losing her brother to an opioid overdose tied to dock trafficking. It had changed her from patient to precise. Rowe noticed Daniel after several minutes. Recognition crossed his face, followed by resignation. "Didn't think I'd see you here," Rowe said. Daniel nodded. "Didn't think I'd find you either." They spoke carefully at first. Weather, the river, the city's stubborn refusal to soften. Then Daniel leaned closer. "Hale's losing control," he said. Rowe stiffened. "I don't know what you're talking about." Daniel slid a napkin across the bar. On it, Cassandra had written a single date and time. Rowe's jaw tightened. "You shouldn't have that." "No," Daniel agreed. "You shouldn't have needed it." Silence stretched. Finally, Rowe exhaled. "He told me it was temporary, just until things settled." "They never do," Daniel said. Rowe's shoulders sagged. "I don't want to be buried." "Then don't be," Daniel replied. "Tell us where the leverage is kept." Rowe looked down at his beer, then up. "He doesn't trust digital. Learned that after the vault fiasco." Daniel's eyes flicked briefly toward the door. "It's physical," Rowe continued. "Paper copies, original signatures, stored off-site." "Where?" Daniel asked. Rowe swallowed. "An old freight stable on the south edge of the city. Converted storage. He visits it alone." When Cassandra heard this later, her stomach tightened. Stables, she murmured. Of course. They moved fast. The freight stable sat beyond the active yards, a long, low structure of brick and timber, its roof patched and sagging. Inside, the air smelled of hay and oil. 2 horses remained there, not for work, but for Hale's private use. Old habits, Cassandra thought. A man who trusted animals more than people. The horses were tall, calm creatures. One chestnut, one dark bay, both older. Their movements slow but deliberate. They watched silently as Cassandra and Daniel entered, ears flicking, nostrils flaring. Animals, Cassandra had learned, always noticed tension first. Hale was there. He stood near a metal cabinet bolted to the center wall, his jacket off, sleeves rolled, his mustache damp with sweat. In this setting, stripped of polished corridors and controlled lighting, he looked older, smaller, a man, carrying too much weight in too many directions. "You shouldn't be here," Hale said when he saw them. "Neither should you," Cassandra replied. Rex stepped forward then, emerging from behind Daniel. Hale's eyes widened briefly before narrowing. "You brought the dog," he said. "Sentimental. Practical," Cassandra corrected. Hale laughed, sharp and humorless. "You think Alexander will protect you? He'll discard you the moment you're inconvenient." "Maybe," Cassandra said, "but you won't get the chance." She nodded at the cabinet. "Open it." Hale hesitated. His gaze darted toward the horses, then back to Rex. His hands shook slightly as he unlocked the cabinet. Inside were folders, dozens of them, meticulously labeled. Contracts, letters, evidence of bribes, threats, quiet agreements spanning years. Enough to cripple the organization if released. Daniel let out a low breath. "You were going to burn the city to stay alive." Hale's shoulders slumped. "I just wanted leverage, control." "Control is an illusion," Cassandra said softly. "Patterns always break." Hale's eyes flicked to her. "You're not like them." "No," she agreed. "I'm not." Sirens sounded in the distance. Not police, but internal security. Klein's people, Cassandra realized. The timeline had been tight, but not invisible. Daniel looked at her. "We need to move." Cassandra shook her head. "No." She stepped closer to Hale. "You're going to hand this over, all of it." "And if I don't?" Hale asked. Rex growled, low and steady. Hale closed his eyes. When he opened them, the fight was gone. "I'm tired," he said. "I don't want to keep running." They left the stable with the evidence secured, and Hale walking between them, not restrained, but finished. Later, back underground, Alexander Castellano reviewed the contents in silence. When he looked up, his gaze settled on Cassandra with something new behind it, respect. "You could have destroyed him," Alexander said. "Instead, you brought him to me." "I don't decide outcomes," Cassandra replied. "I reveal them." Alexander nodded once. "That may be the most dangerous skill of all." As Cassandra returned to her room, Rex limping faithfully beside her, she understood what this night had changed. Hale was finished, but the system he had fed would now turn, hungry, and exposed, and she was no longer just surviving inside it, she was shaping it. Chicago woke slowly that morning, wrapped in low clouds that clung to the steel and glass of its skyline. The river moved like a dark ribbon through the city's spine, carrying reflections of bridges, traffic lights, and lives that never paused long enough to notice the water beneath them. Spring was trying to arrive, but winter still resisted, leaving the air cold, sharp, honest. It was the kind of morning that stripped illusions away. Cassandra Hartwell stood at the tall window of the underground complex's upper level, hands resting loosely at her sides. She no longer felt the need to hide her posture or shrink her presence. The city above her was not a prison anymore. It was a system, complex, flawed, alive, and she finally understood how to move within it. Behind her, Rex lay on the polished concrete floor, his black and tan coat catching the light. At 9 years old, the German Shepherd carried the quiet dignity of age. His muzzle had begun to gray, and his left hind leg, reinforced by a sleek carbon fiber prosthetic, rested at a careful angle. He had once been a police canine, partnered with Daniel Mercer during Daniel's final years on the force. An explosion during a dock raid had taken Rex's leg and Daniel's certainty about the world. Neither of them had ever fully recovered, but they had survived together. Now, Rex lifted his head as footsteps approached. Alexander Castellano entered without announcement. He looked different today, not softer, but lighter, as if a weight he had carried for years had finally been set down. His suit was still immaculate, dark charcoal, perfectly fitted, but his shoulders were no longer tense. The sharp angles of his face remained, yet his eyes, those dark, assessing eyes, held something new, resolution. "It's finished," Alexander said. Cassandra turned. "Hale?" "Gone," Alexander replied. "Not buried, not erased, exposed. The evidence you brought dismantled every thread he held, his leverage, dissolved the moment it was seen." "And the others?" she asked. Alexander exhaled slowly. "Some will fall, some will adapt. The structure will survive, but it will change." That mattered to her. Alexander studied her for a long moment. "You didn't ask for anything in return." "I asked for the system to stop lying to itself," Cassandra said. "That's enough." He nodded. "It always starts with one correction." Later that day, Cassandra walked above ground for the first time in weeks. The air was colder than she expected, the noise louder, the city less controlled. She welcomed all of it. Daniel walked beside her, hands in his jacket pockets, moving with the same quiet vigilance that had once defined him as a police officer. His beard was rougher now, his hair showing more gray than before, but his eyes were clearer. "You could leave," Daniel said as they crossed a bridge overlooking the river. "You've earned that. So could you," Cassandra replied. Daniel smiled faintly. "Maybe, but I like fixing things now." Rex trotted ahead of them, confident despite his limp, stopping occasionally to sniff the air like the world still held surprises worth discovering. They stopped near the Riverwalk, where the city opened into space and light. Cassandra leaned on the railing, watching the water. "I used to think survival meant staying invisible," she said. "Now I think it means choosing what you change." Daniel nodded. "That's why you won." "I didn't win," she said softly. "I balanced something." That afternoon, Cassandra met someone new. Officer Lena Price stood near a parked patrol vehicle, arms folded, posture alert but relaxed. In daylight, her sharpness softened slightly. She was shorter than Cassandra had expected, her build compact and strong, her dark hair pulled back into a practical braid. Her eyes were observant, but not unkind. "I hear you don't like systems," Lena said. "I like honest ones," Cassandra replied. Lena smiled. "Good. We could use more of those." They spoke briefly, about docs, about data, about what happened when corruption was allowed to grow unnoticed. Lena mentioned her brother only once, without drama, but the grief behind her words shaped everything she said. Cassandra recognized it immediately. Loss that had become purpose. As the sun dipped lower, Alexander called Cassandra back underground one final time. He waited in the same office where she had once felt like a variable being measured. "You've changed the trajectory of this organization," he said. "That gives you options." "I don't want power," Cassandra replied. "I want distance." Alexander considered that. "Then take it." He slid a slim folder across the desk. Inside was an agreement, clean, precise, fair. Cassandra would remain a consultant, not embedded, not controlled. She would choose her involvement. Her work would focus on transparency, prevention, and correction, not dominance. "You're giving up leverage," Cassandra said. Alexander met her gaze. "Leverage only matters if you plan to use it," she signed. That night, Cassandra packed what little she had accumulated. Rex watched from the doorway, tail thumping softly against the floor. Their new apartment sat above ground, modest but bright, overlooking a park instead of concrete walls. It wasn't luxury. It was space, light, air. Daniel helped carry boxes. He lingered at the door when they finished. "So," he said, awkwardly. "What now?" Cassandra looked around, then at Rex, then back at Daniel. "Now we live somewhere the window's open." Daniel laughed quietly. "That sounds dangerous." Rex barked once, as if agreeing. Weeks passed. The city adjusted. New audits replaced old secrets. Quiet reforms rippled outward. Some resisted, some adapted, but the machine no longer ran unchecked. Cassandra found herself walking Rex every morning through the park, the rhythm grounding her. Children asked about his leg. She answered honestly. People listened. One afternoon, she received a message from Alexander. No demands, no warnings, just a single line. "Patterns are holding." She smiled. On a crisp evening, Cassandra stood on her balcony, the city lights flickering on one by one. Daniel sat nearby, coffee in hand. Rex stretched at their feet. I used to think numbers were the safest thing in the world, Cassandra said. Because they don't lie. Daniel glanced at her. They still don't. No, she agreed. But people do, and they're worth understanding anyway. Rex lifted his head, ears forward, alert to the sounds of the city. Chicago breathed. And for the first time in a long while, Cassandra Hartwell breathed with it. Not as someone hiding in the margins, but as someone who had learned how to see the whole pattern and choose where she belonged within it. As this story comes to an end, one truth remains quietly standing. Miracles don't always arrive with thunder or blinding light. Sometimes they come disguised as patience, as courage, as a wounded dog who refuses to lie down and give up, as a tired soul who keeps doing the right thing even when no one is watching. The Bible tells us that God works in silence far more often than in spectacle, that He lifts the forgotten, walks beside the broken, and writes hope into places the world has already given up on. Maybe you're watching this tonight, feeling unseen. Maybe you're carrying worries no one knows about. Maybe you're tired of being strong for everyone else. If so, let this story remind you of this. God has not forgotten you, and even the smallest act of faith, kindness, or perseverance can open a door you never knew existed. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment below and tell us what part spoke to you most, or where you're watching from. We read every single one. And if you believe that no child, no animal, and no human soul should ever face fear alone, consider subscribing to this channel so we can continue sharing stories that heal and uplift. May God bless you, protect you, and guide your steps. May peace find your home, strength find your heart, and hope meet you exactly where you are. Thank you for being here. Until next time.